Welcome to another episode of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is my old friend, Sally Helgesen. Grace Under Pressure, it's an interview show that poses questions to thought leaders and doers like Sally, whose ideas and actions are helping us come to a greater understanding of ourselves. Grace Under Pressure reveals what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the connecting, commitment we feel. Grace for me is generosity we show, respect we give, compassion we demonstrate. And when you do it as a leader in our challenging times, it requires your ability to act for the benefit of others and energize everyone around us. So welcome, Sally. It's so good to see you. And we were talking before, Sally and I have known each other since early in this century. We both met at a meeting in La Jolla, and Marshall Goldsmith was the host. And I remember Marshall pointing you out. There was a group of us there. He goes, and that's Sally Helgesen. She is the world's leader on women in leadership. And I thought to myself, I got to meet Sally Helgesen. So welcome, Sally.
Thank you, John. It's wonderful to be here with you.
I want to tell the folks a little bit more about you. Forbes called you the world premier expert on women's leadership. You're a best-selling author internationally, and you're the only author I know that has spoken, at least virtually, in Mongolia, I think.
And many unusual places.
You're a top 30 thinker by global gurus. You're an excellent coach. You're also a member of Thinkers 50. And like me, you're a member of Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches. Your most recent book, which you co-authored with Marshall, is How Women Rise. And folks, this book is a groundbreaker. I bought it and I gave it to my wife, and it's disappeared. But before it disappeared, I saw it was totally written on. And I know my wife has given it to others. My wife is an executive and a very accomplished and mentors a lot of folks. So this book was seminal. And so I know, Sally, you speak around the world. When we did speak live, but we're doing it now virtually. And so welcome to the show. So Sally, what are you hearing from leaders, executives about how they're feeling now in our time of pandemic?
I would say primarily confusion. We're in about the third inning here. I think we thought early on that by the summer we'd be in about the sixth or seventh, but there's just tremendous amount of confusion. We don't know how this will unfold. They're worried about their people. They have to lay people off. They may be shrinking. Some companies are having to expand very rapidly, but again, without knowing what the landscape looks like. So it is one of the most challenging periods I've ever seen. It is the most challenging period I've ever seen. Recession, whatever, this is it.
Right. Sally, do you think we're going to evolve into a kind of hybrid workplace, whereas some folks work in an office, a physical location, and a number of us work from home virtually? Do you see that?
Oh, definitely see that. I was reading Financial Times, and there was an interview with the chairman of Tata Corporation, one of the biggest companies in the world, based in Mumbai and UK and in London. And he was saying that he predicts that by the end of this decade, 70% of Tata's workforce will be virtual. And this has huge impacts. And it also, we talk a lot about the working from home impact, but also in terms of the globalization. One of their impetuses is no more visa problems. So it's really, it's a watershed in terms of this. The trend was already moving this way, but boy, did this increase it with head spinning speed.
Okay. Now, what will this, I agree, I think we're going to end up with a hybrid, but what impact do you think this will have on emerging women managers and emerging women executives? Is this a plus or a negative or neutral? What's your perspective?
I think it's a plus and a negative, and that right now some of the negative consequences are front and center because schools are closed. We're looking at a very long-term trend here, and schools are not going to remain closed. In many places, they are reopening. I'm talking primarily about outside of the US. in Europe and Japan and in Asia. But I think it's been very, very challenging for women to have young children at home and then be expected to show up and do their job virtually. There are all kinds of issues about appearing professional when you've got, what you've got in the background. So I think there's a certain anxiety about how to manage all this right now. On the other hand, what I think is significant to think about is that this will be, to the extent we shift to making the home the primary place of paid work, employment, this will shift the terrain of where we do our work to what has traditionally been female turf for the first time since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Pre-revolution, people worked at home. Home was a workshop. We're going back to something like that. And it is a massive change. Women are participants, so it's on their turf. So I think there are going to be some significant changes in how families are balanced, the whole 9 yards. We're at the start of something that's really, really big.
I've heard you talk about women's turf, and I love that concept. How do you think that's going to play out in the workplace? Is that how will women take it? How will women maximize that opportunity? Is it an opportunity?
Well, it's an opportunity with some pitfalls in it. But what it seems to me, I've been in women's leadership for 30 years, since I wrote The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership in 1990, first book to look at what women had to contribute as leaders rather than how they needed to change and adapt. So I have a pretty long perspective on this. And what has been obvious to me is that one of the great things women brought into the workplace was an ability to draw information and experience from their private domestic lives, their lives as mothers, as wives, as sisters, as community members, as churchgoers, bringing that information to their work and vice versa, bringing professional skills from the workplace into their homes. So they were much easier about that sort of integration of those skills. And it was a contrast, Henry Mintzberg, one of my colleagues who I really look up to, had written a book about male managers before The Female Advantage came out that used diary studies. So I kind of adapted that method. And one of Henry's big criticisms of the male executives that he studied was that they firmly compartmentalized their personal and private lives, and that this cut them off from a certain really authenticity as human beings, and also made it very difficult for them to retire. So women brought this as a gift into the workplace. It was to some degree acknowledged. To a good degree, it became influential, the whole work-life balance conversation. And now again, with head spinning speed, we're being forced into a time of that really, really beginning to change the whole idea of workplace culture. And how does workplace culture differ from societal culture? Big question.
I think it's interesting. As you just posed that question, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, there's such a blending between the two that what's that going to mean? And so do you have a perspective? Do you want to toss something out?
Well, the blending is now going to be physical as well as in terms of skills. So it's going to be physical. And I think that one of the consequences, you go back to a pre-industrial model, when home was also the workshop or the farm, the place where production of value took place, you had to have a real partnership between men and women. I mean, especially a farm, you had to have this integration of labor and people working for a similar objective. And it was very non-compartmentalized. And I think that that's what we'll move back to, and that both men and women will, in terms of evaluating partners, be thinking of that. How will this person be to have around all day? And, it will give us more of a common sense of purpose, a sense of being yoked together. And I believe it will certainly be an opportunity for men to get more involved in the raising of children. Strategy and Business did a poll recently. It was global, and they found that something like 68% of the men polled thought of this time as a great period to get much, much more involved.
That's great.
Use it that way.
Oh, that's great. I love the term you said when choosing a spouse, you use the term yoked together, and that harken back to farm life when I honestly hadn't really thought about that, but it genuinely was a partnership. The women, it wasn't just doing, well, they quote, did all the domestic stuff, but also,
the market garden,
made butter and all that stuff for sale or whatever. They were full. It was a full partnership, and it's interesting that we're in a way kind of echoing back that in a different way. Let me throw a spanner in the works here. You know that, and you've spoken about this, that proximity to power is often a way to get noticed. And if you're noticed in a positive sense, that's opportunities for greater responsibility and promotion. Now in our virtual workplace, is that going to change? Is it going to be proximity to power? And will that favor men, or will it be neutralized? Any thought?
I don't think we know how that's going to play out. However, proximity to power will no longer necessarily be defined physically, like your office is right there. You bump into that person, you have that kind of relationship with them. Still, as Peter Drucker pointed out, the person with decision-making power is always the person who makes the decision. And that is, in fact, the definition of power. So there are going to be challenges, I believe, in being recognized and making ourselves visible to people who have power. And we do not, in the virtual environment, have the option of not having a plan to do that. Every one of us needs to be intentional about how we think about getting visibility to the people who have the power over the resources that we need to be able to flourish, do our job, and make our best contribution.
What a powerful thought. Any suggestions on how to make oneself more visible?
Yes, well, we're all learning. We're all learning how to make ourselves visible virtually. It involves being very connected, staying in touch with people, staying in touch with new people, responding to people. It also requires learning how to use some of the new technologies with real skill and comfort, something I notice, my friend John, that you have been very astute about doing, that we need to think about how we look. I do a lot of programs, and I'm still shocked that I will do programs with professional people, and then we go on like this, and they're down, or you see their eyebrows, or their whatever. We all need, this is the basics of how we show up in the world. And it may not be comfortable for us. It's not comfortable for me, but we have to learn it. So taking responsibility for how we show up in terms of, our presentation.
Right.
All we've got is our face and our voice. We don't have to worry about comfortable shoes anymore. This is it. This is what you get. And so we really need to work on that and think about how can I represent myself in a really authentic way, in a warm way, but also as a professional. And how can I be sure that what I say is both concise and lands with impact? That's how we will be building visibility. That's how we will be attracting the support of those with power.
I think what that boils down to is being more planful, thinking about what you're going to say, prepare for that meeting. Correct? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And that's it's really the issue with being concise. People who are concise in their presentations, they're not naturally concise. They just think about it in advance. And that it always shows up. I mean, I went to a funeral a couple months ago, and there were two eulogists, all were friends of the fellow who had died. There were two eulogists who just had beautiful ways of talking, and they were prepared, and they were about 8 minutes each. And then there were two eulogists who meandered on for 30 minutes trying to figure out what in the heck they were going to say about this person.
Right.
And it's such an example to me that of the value of preparation for anything like that.
Right. That's so powerful. You brought a copy of How Women Rise.
Yeah, of course.
And it is a book of habits. Is it not? And so what habits are coming to the fore now that will distinguish us or women in particular? Anything? So.
Well, How Women Rise is about the habits and behaviors most likely to get in the way of successful women as they seek to move to a higher level. And some of the habits include things like reluctance to claim your achievements, expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions, overvaluing expertise, etc. I don't see most of these building rather than leveraging relationships. I see all of these as pretty much constants. I've worked with women for 30 years and watched them demonstrate some of these behaviors. I've probably incarnated at one time or another all 12 of them myself. But I think that how we deal with them is going to be somewhat different in terms of how do we claim our achievements when we've got, when everything is mediated by the technology. How do we begin to do that? How do we begin to develop the skills of personal communication up and down chain of command when we're all sort of out there floating in the ether? So those things are going to be, I think, front and center. The habits will remain the same that get in women's ways. And by the way, these are habits that usually serve women early in their career, but then become a problem as they seek to move to a higher level.
One of the things I know it's talk about and positioning yourself and leveraging what you've done is to make frequent use of the personal pronoun we. Okay?
Yeah.
So what does we mean in a virtual world?
What does we mean? And it's interesting because I think that we is a little bit of a trap for women, because women will often tend to go to the we immediately as if the I doesn't exist. Oh, you did a great job on that. Oh, it was my team. My team was great. Okay, it was your team. Of course, most work is done in teams. My team was great, but what I was able to contribute was X. It's not an either or. So I think the we can be a little bit of a trap. I did a program some years ago for one of the major consulting firms in the world. And the event planner was a guy in the company, and he had chosen as the theme, there is no I in team. And I had some pre-meetings with the women, and it was very clear to me that they were almost incapable of using the word I. And I just saw how he had adapted a template and put it on the women, and it had really nothing to do with their challenges.
Right. And we wonder why men get promoted.
Yeah, exactly.
So as we think, you mentioned something interesting the other day when you were speaking. You had a terrific experience an amusing experience in Japan.
Yeah.
About the book, and you asked about habits. Would you tell us that story?
Sure. It was amazing. And I think it was the second or third trip I'd been there with How Women Rise, which I was very surprised was a big bestseller in Japan. It made the top selling 10 top selling books in Japan. It made that list. So it was my second or third trip doing some programs related to How Women Rise. And I was making the point that I made to you earlier, which is that these aren't bad habits. They've served you to a certain point, but they can get in your way. And yet the women kept referring to, I have this bad habit. I have that bad habit. And I said, as we've been talking about, these are not bad habits. These are often very good habits that don't work at a senior level. And so one of the women stood up and she said, I don't know if you're aware of it, but the title of your book in Japanese is Women's Bad Habits. That Well, no wonder it's a bestseller. So we've got a little work to do.
By husbands, I suppose, perhaps, whatever. Oh,
Yeah.
that's good. That is just as we think about our new normal and evolving women's leadership, let me just ask a very self-interested question. What's in it for men when women lead? So.
Well, I think that one of the things you began by talking about soft skills and Grace encapsulating soft skills. And two thoughts arose to me. Number one was when the Female Advantage came out in 1990, what the pushback I got is, you are talking about soft skills. I was talking about communication, building relationships, leading from the center, comfort with diversity. I was talking about those kinds of qualities. And kept saying, those aren't leadership skills. Those are soft skills. That's how it was. It was 1990. Jack Welch was on the cover of Fortune every week. It was a different era in terms of thinking about leadership. And so I knew that these were leadership skills, but, people weren't listening. And so I think that one of the great gifts that women have brought to everyone in the workplace, to men as well, is permission to engage soft skills, which are very, very useful in today's environment. Our colleague and friend Tom Peters has a wonderful thing he always says, and I think he puts it in Pursuit of Excellence, his most recent book. He said, in today's environment, soft is hard and hard is soft, meaning numbers are friable and soft skills are difficult. Right. And I think we have moved to the point of recognition of that in large part because of women's participation. And that is a gift to men and women.
And I like this because, I have a question about what makes us human as leaders. And I think you just answered that, but do you want to add a dimension on our humanity, bringing our humanity to leadership? So,
what makes us human as leaders is our vulnerabilities and our capacity to be humble. Our capacity to be humble and to recognize that larger forces, events, and other people are also at play, and that we're not taking responsibility for the successes and disclaiming responsibility for failures is not a route to any kind of success in this environment, and that we're allowed, even in leadership positions, to fail, to make poor decisions, to use resources incorrectly, to vote for a strategy that is not particularly helpful to the organization, as long as, can't do it all the time, but we can do that. We get a little bit of a pass on that as long as we can admit that the fault was ours, that we have the humility to try to learn how to do it differently and to analyze what may have led us astray in the past, and have some awareness of what our vulnerabilities are that led us here.
I'm so glad you raised the topic of vulnerability, and we talk about making our leaders authentic and showing vulnerability. And that works wonderful for male leaders. Is there a backlash when a woman an executive is vulnerable or shows vulnerability, and how to avoid that trap? So,
I really think that showing genuine vulnerability is a plus for both men and women. Where it becomes an issue for women is where it's demonstrated as, for example, by minimizing, oh, I'm sorry I did that, I always do something like that, where you're sort of sharing negative self-talk, diminishing what you've contributed. And I think that it's more in how it's sometimes communicated. And I've watched this, and I think that a very authentic, strong recognition of what one's vulnerabilities are is powerful for men and women both.
That's great. There's something I've noticed, and maybe because all the cable television we watch, news programs, people are in their homes just as we are in our workplaces. And it's interesting, there's so many women who are there, and sometimes the child will be around or they'll hear something, and that if a man's there, he's kind of like, it's there. But a woman apologizes, and it's almost like, I'm a bad mom. And these are incredibly accomplished women. And I just want to say, please don't do that. So, do you have a reaction to that?
Oh my goodness, apologizing. It was really the issue of apologizing that made me suggest to Marshall that we collaborate on How Women Rise, because the template for the book is based on What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which is about the habits and behaviors most likely to get in the way of successful people. And one of the first habits he talks about is learn to apologize. And I thought, are you kidding? This is rarely a problem for women. I think we need to remedy this, and told him that. But I have gotten to the point where when I was doing programs live and in person, I was so frequently apologized to by the women who were doing the program. Oh, is the coffee cold? I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. This lectern looks so. These are things they had nothing to do with. Did you make the coffee? No. Why are you sorry? Just endless apologies. And I remember once I was up in Boston with a financial services company, and this very senior woman who was my point person for the program, I said, you know what? The 9th time you apologize, I'm going to fine you. I'm going to ask you what charity you want me to contribute it to, but I am going to fine you. Guess what? I did. I fined her about 4 times on the 10th, 11th, and 12th apologies. And I said, I hope you learned something from this, because it doesn't help you to constantly apologize. Oh, I'm sorry I'm late. How about thanks for waiting for me? There are all kinds of ways you can turn that around. And that's not about refusing to admit vulnerability. It's about moving forward with real professionalism and demonstrating that ease with who you are.
Great. And that leads into as we wind up, into the concept of grace. And what viewers don't know is that it was 2 summers ago that I interviewed you for my book, Grace. And you gave me such nuggets of wisdom, one of which I still resonate almost every time I say it, is that grace is a gift. Okay. And it's no strings attached. So is there an example in grace in your life that you want to share with us? So.
I've had so many. I have had so much grace in my life. And really, that's the heart of it. Grace is the opposite of meritocracy. We live and operate in an economy of grace, where we recognize with some humility the gifts we've been given, or we live in an economy of meritocracy where we believe we earned every single thing we get. For me, an unusual and very vivid instance of grace has been what's happened in this pandemic for me personally. Now, I know how much pain is out there. I have 6 friends who've had it. I've had 3 friends who died from COVID, because I live near New York City and was there for many, many years. So I know how much pain and agony there is there. But for me, suddenly getting off the road after being home for about 3 to 4 weeks a year since How Women Rise came out, and having this time to be at home and to be in the beautiful place that I live in and not have to run myself ragged staying on the road has been an enormous grace. And as soon as I could get over the shock of how much money I lost, I was able to recognize that as a great gift. It doesn't mean I want it to go on forever, but for right now, I am so grateful for this beautiful time.
Oh, that's great. How can we find you?
Oh, I'm pretty easy to find. My website is sallyhelgesen.com. I've got a contact button there that goes right to my email, which is sally@sallyhelgesen.com. And I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm on other platforms too, but I really respond to LinkedIn, and that's where I try to cultivate my professional relationships.
Great. And if anybody is curious about it, you can also Google Sally Helgesen.
Yeah.
You'll find thousands of entries about her. Sally, thanks for coming on. This is an honor for me because I know you are a true definition of a person much in demand. Before you came on today, didn't you have 3 other interviews or 3 other programs you gave, starting in the Middle East to now?
Yeah, Dubai at 9 a.m. But yeah, it's a busy time.
Well, thanks for squeezing me in. You are truly changing the world for the positive. It's an honor to know you. And we'll go with a little outro. And thank you, Sally.
Thank you, John. Wonderful to be here.